I am required to begin with the chain of custody, unremarkable as it may appear. Item Group 13-79 was transferred to Vault 13 from a municipal records annex in Jackson County, somewhere in the middle of the continent during the first large intake of post-flood materials. The crate itself was a common thing: double-walled cardboard, water stains on 3 sides, and a county inventory sticker peeled halfway off. It sat untouched in secondary intake for 6 years. No one opened it because no one thought it belonged to us. It was flagged eventually by Technician Mora during a routine reconciliation sweep. The accession ledger listed the crate as Environmental Assessment Records, Spring Flood Event, with a note indicating potential duplication with items already catalogued under a different county office. Mora noticed that the duplicate accession number referenced a shipment that did not, in fact, exist. The number belonged to nothing. An empty line in the system, cross-referenced to a crate that had never arrived. She was curious enough to cut the tape and look inside. What she found was not the usual loose stack of damp pills. The interior of the crate had been lined with contractor-grade plastic sheeting, folded over itself and sealed with gray tape, in a diligent, almost obsessive fashion. Within that cocoon there was a single 3-ring binder, a smaller cloth-bound notebook, a plastic bag containing what appears to be soil, and a cassette tape in a police department evidence sleeve. The county inventory log, printed on cheap paper and stapled to the inside of the lid, listed only one of these. Field Log, Flood Control Survey, District 3. No mention of the notebook, no mention of the soil, certainly no mention of the tape. I examined the binder first. It is a standard field log maintained by a 3-person survey crew contracted to the Jackson County Flood Control District, covering a 3-day period in late April of a year that, in the interest of containment, I will not specify. The entries are dated, signed, and cross-referenced to county work order numbers that correspond, imperfectly, to digital records still recoverable from the county servers. The cloth-bound notebook complicates matters. It contains handwriting that matches with a high degree of confidence the primary hand in the field log, but the dates inside it do not align with the official work orders. In fact, some of the dates do not align with the calendar at all. One entry, for example, is marked as April 31st. There is no such date. The soil bag is labeled in blue marker, a hurried scrawl. Sample taken inside structure, day 3. The structure is not named. There is no official property record tied to that note. When Technician Hari ran a preliminary analysis on the contents, he logged an unusual pollen profile, including several species that, according to the agricultural extension records in Vault 7, had not grown in that county for decades before the log was written. The cassette tape is the only openly acknowledged anomaly in the crate. The Sheriff's Department evidence sleeve bears a case number and a terse description, all in capital letters. It reads, "Missing crew, survey team, last recorded contact." The case file associated with that number has not yet been recovered. Local law enforcement archives can be fragmentary, especially when they are boxed and shuttled between basements by people who do not expect anyone, ever, to look too closely. I am, unfortunately, paid to look too closely. What led this material to Vault 13, however, is a small note written in black ink on the inside cover of the field log. It is not part of the official record. It appears to have been added by whoever packed the crate for long-term storage, likely a county clerk or records technician. The note is brief, the handwriting hesitant, as if the author did not entirely believe what they were admitting. It reads, "House was not on any previous map. Locals insist there was never a building in that field. I do not know where it came from." Below that, in a different hand, someone has added, almost as an afterthought, a single sentence. "Check prior surveys. The house was not there yesterday." There are other reasons this material has been placed under restriction in Vault 13. The more technical justifications involve coordinate drift, architectural sketches that do not obey basic geometry, and one floor plan that matches in unsettling detail a portion of this facility that did not exist at the time the log was written. We will return to that. For now, I will do what I have always done. I will reconstruct as faithfully as the surviving documents allow what happened over those 3 days in April, when a small team of tired, underpaid workers drove out to an empty field to confirm that nothing important had washed away. According to the official record, there was nothing there at all. No house, no structure, no reason on paper for anyone to remember the place. What follows is the story as I have assembled it, drawn from the field log, the personal notebook, and the partial audio recovered from the tape. The logbook makes it easy to forget there were people at the other end of the ink. On paper, day 1 begins with nothing more dramatic than a culvert inspection. 3 names appear over and over in the records. Thomas Hale, the lead surveyor, Maria Torres, the senior tech, and a younger assistant, Jonah Kincaid. They worked for the Jackson County Flood Control District, District 3, and their job that week was to check for damage after a series of heavy spring storms. The work order for that day sent them to a fallow field east of County Road 92. The coordinates put them in a low, open basin that had served for decades as a relief area during floods. It should have been empty. The last aerial imagery, taken just a few months before, shows unbroken grass and bare earth. The logbook shows nothing unusual on their way in. They parked the truck at the field's southern edge as instructed. The ground was soft but stable. Hale noted minor cracking in the soil where water had pooled and receded. That is entirely ordinary for that terrain. Still, something had bothered them even then. The younger man's notebook, the smaller cloth-bound one that was never meant for official review, includes an early line about the air feeling heavy, as if the storm had not quite finished. On its own, that could be dismissed as mood. I have read enough of these field books to know people sometimes vent into the margins. What matters is that when they first cross the field toward the culvert, none of them mention a house. They walked 70 or 80 meters to the north boundary, inspected the drainage, and marked down erosion and debris. The work is logged with the detached precision of people who have done the same task 100 times. Only on their way back toward the truck does the narrative kink. Hale's handwriting grows a little tighter. In the middle of a sentence about soil stability, he breaks off and adds a new line about observed structure due west. He labels it as a 2-story residence. No address, no utility connections, not recorded on any of the county's maps. The way he phrases it tells me something. He does not say they discovered the house. He simply says they observed it, as if it had always been there and he had only now thought to mention it. The personal notebook disagrees. Kincaid's entry for that afternoon is blunt. He insists they would have noticed a 2-story house standing alone in the middle of an empty field on their way out. He writes that it was not there before, and underlines the sentence twice. Torres's comments scattered through the margins of the official log land somewhere between the two. She does not state outright that the building appeared out of nowhere. She does, however, question how any residence had been built out there without a driveway, without power, without even the suggestion of a footpath in the surrounding soil. From the sheriff's tape fragments, they stood there for some time without speaking. The audio captures boots scuffing in the dirt. Someone's breath catches, then steadies. Finally, Hale tells the others that if there is unpermitted construction in a flood basin, they are obligated to document it. That is how they justified walking toward the house. The description of the structure on day 1 is strange only in hindsight. To them, it still fit familiar patterns. The house was wooden, with a steep roof and a single chimney. The paint, if there had ever been any, had long since peeled or been weathered off, leaving gray boards that looked older than the recorded use of the land. 2 windows faced the field on the 2nd floor. They saw no lights, no curtains, no movement. There was no driveway, no mailbox, no service lines running overhead or underground. The soil came right up to the foundation as if the building had been set down onto the field with no preparation. Inside, the 1st floor presented itself as an ordinary layout. A living room facing the front, a kitchen at the back, a hallway between. The living room contained only a tired sofa, a wooden chair, and a small table with a lamp that was not wired to anything. The dust on the floor was thin. They noticed it. They wrote it down. Abandoned houses do not stay clean, especially in farm country. What they did not say at the time, but hint at later, is that the room felt like a stage. The furniture was placed just so, as though someone had tried to approximate how a living room should look from memory and accepted good enough, once it resembled the idea. In the kitchen, nothing worked. The sink was dry. The refrigerator was empty. The clock on the wall above the sink was frozen at one specific time, 2:18. The face was round and plastic, the sort one might buy cheaply at a discount store. None of them remark on the chosen time that first day. It was just another detail among many. Only later, when the pattern emerges, does that frozen moment acquire weight. Most of the first floor they treat as curiosity and nuisance. Unrecorded construction meant paperwork, follow-up inspections, possibly some unpleasant conversations with the landowner. It was odd, but it was still something they could place in a known category. The discomfort begins in the hallway. The house was not large. Measured outside, its footprint would suggest a modest corridor leading from living room and kitchen toward a small back door and a stairwell to the second floor. Inside, the distance felt wrong. Hale notes a hallway longer than he expected from his initial walk around the building. He blames his own sense of proportion. Surveyors do that. They trust measurements over impressions. The younger man does not have that habit yet. He writes about counting the floorboards and getting a larger number than should fit. He goes back and counts again, certain he must have miscounted, and gets the same result. He writes that the air in the hall felt cooler halfway down than it did at either end, as if he had walked briefly through a draft with no apparent source. At the far end of the hallway stood a door to the stairwell. Officially, they did not enter the second floor that day. Hale records that the script for their assignment did not require it, and that they would dedicate more time on day 2 for a full interior inspection. Torres adds a note in the margin recommending a return with better lighting. The younger man's notebook contradicts them both. He writes, almost as a confession, that Maria opened the stairwell door and went up a few steps before deciding against it. He does not describe what made her stop or what she saw. He only says that when she came back down, she seemed eager to finish the inspection and leave. That reluctance is absent from her official annotations. Outside, behind the house, they found a back door that opened onto a short porch with no steps. It hung a good distance above the ground in a way that would make regular use inconvenient. The earth directly below it showed no sign of disturbance. No footprints, no dragged objects, no patch where anyone had repeatedly jumped down. The world around them, according to every instrument they carried, remained ordinary. The same handheld meter that would later record anomalous coordinate drift showed a normal fix that day. The barometer read as expected. Temperature and humidity matched nearby stations. It was in the house, and in the impressions the house gave back to them, that things began to bend. They left in mid-afternoon. Hale's closing line for the day is flat. He recommends returning the next morning to follow up, now that they know there is a structure on the property. The private notebook ends differently. In cramped writing at the bottom of the page, wedged into a corner as if he did not intend anyone to see it, the younger man records a last glance over his shoulder as they walked away. He writes that he saw, or thought he saw, a figure in one of the upstairs windows, a dark shape at a second-floor pane where he knew there had been no curtains. He tells himself it must have been a trick of the light. He does not sleep well that night. The next morning they go back, and the house is waiting for them. On the second day, the anomalies stop being easy to explain away. The first sign is in the numbers. When Hale logs their arrival, he records a fresh set of coordinates for the house's location. The county's equipment was not precise by modern standards, but it was not imprecise enough to justify what appears on the page. The new coordinates are shifted several meters from the previous day's record. That alone might be chalked up to operator error. What makes it harder to ignore is the way that shift repeats. We have seen coordinate drift before in other files. Technician Hari flagged a similar pattern in the materials from Vault 9, in a case involving a sinking service road that never quite lined up with its own survey markers. These are rare but not unique. What is unusual here is how quickly the crew accepts the discrepancy without saying so. Torres notes the mismatch in the margin, then crosses her own comment out. The younger man writes that the field feels familiar but not quite right, as if they are arriving from a different angle, even though the road and ditch and fence all look the same. The house looks the same at first glance. It stands in the same fallow basin, the same boards, the same chimney, but the sketches from day 1 and day 2 do not match. On the second morning, Hale draws a slightly different roof line, extended in the back as if some portion of the house has always been there, and he simply overlooked it. He does not comment on this change. He only notes the presence of the structure and logs their approach. When they reach the porch, the door is no longer closed. The first day, each of them remarks in one way or another that they had to turn the knob. On day 2, the door stands open just enough to show darkness beyond. No footprints mar the dust on the threshold. No loose soil has been tracked onto the boards. The opening looks like a mouth drawn partway open after a long-held breath. Outside, the weather is calm and bright. There is no wind to move the door. They enter anyway. The living room is not how they left it. The sofa has shifted, rotated across the room without any visible drag marks. The small side table they remember is gone. No one has written down moving it. It is simply absent. That detail bothers Torres. Her annotations make it clear she is the sort of person who remembers where things sit in a room. She writes that something about the dust where the table should have been looks unconvincing, as if the absence has not had time to age. The younger man goes further. In his notebook, he adds a line about the upholstery feeling damp in one spot, as if someone had sat there recently, long enough to leave a trace of their presence. Hale's official entry does not dwell. He simply notes the changed furniture and continues. In the kitchen, a more overt change awaits. The clock above the sink is not the clock they saw the day before. Its design is different. New shape, new casing, different style altogether. But its frozen time has not moved. 2:18. They notice this. All 3 of them do. For the first time, the log and the notebook agree explicitly that the time on the face remains the same, even though the object displaying it is different. Outside of Vault 13, that sort of detail might be folded into a human story. Someone might wonder if they misremembered the clock the first day. We know better. Certain patterns repeat across very different locations. Fixed times, replaced objects that retain the same error. When I see a time like that crop up in a second, unconnected file from a different vault, I will become more concerned than I am prepared to admit here. On day 2, they are limited to their own unease. They walk the hallway again. It has stretched. What should be a short passage to the rear of the house feels longer on foot. Hale records a greater estimated length this time. Torres notes that the ceiling seems farther overhead halfway down than at either end. The younger man does not try to measure. He has learned from the day before that his numbers will only make him more uncertain, so he writes simply that it takes more steps than he expects to reach the far door. The door to the second floor stands where they left it. This time they do not talk themselves out of going up. Their job, as far as the county is concerned, now includes cataloging this unrecorded interior. They have told themselves the house is only strange because it is unexpected. It is a comforting story. It does not hold long. The stairwell feels cramped, the way tightly built stairwells often do in older homes. They count the steps out of habit. The number they record does not match the number the younger man remembers from the day before. There is a subtle disagreement on the exact count, even between them. They note it, then move on, and in doing so begin to accept the idea that the house they walked through yesterday is not precisely the same house they are walking through now. At the top of the stairs, they find a short hallway lined with doors, 4 of them by their recollection on day 1. On day 2, there are 5. The new door sits at the far end, as if it had always waited there. Its paint looks fresher. The wood is a shade newer, less worn. The others seem reluctant to acknowledge this. Hale's entry about the discrepancy is cautious and indirect. Torres does not bother with caution. She writes that one of these doors simply was not there before. They explore the older doors first. One room holds a bed frame and dresser, empty and coated in a thin layer of dust. Another is bare except for a single metal frame bolted to the floor where a mattress might have gone. The windows on this floor are more troubling than the rooms. The view from them does not quite match what they remember seeing outside. Landmarks seem shifted by small degrees. The fence line appears straighter. Distant tree lines bow at unfamiliar angles. The human eye forgives these things. The brain smooths them over. That tendency protects us. It also keeps us from noticing when the world around us is quietly rearranging itself. In their notes, they do not dwell on the view. When they mention it at all, it is in small half-phrases, as if they are whispering something to themselves on the page. The newest door, the one that did not exist before, opens onto a small, windowless room. It is barely large enough for the 3 of them to stand in together. The walls appear freshly painted, though the paint is dry. There is nothing inside. No furniture, no fixtures, no marks. And yet they all agree, in their own ways, that the room feels occupied. The younger man describes a sensation of pressure, as if the air around his chest thickened the moment he crossed the threshold. Torres writes about the strange impression that the room is listening. On one wall there is a faint rectangular outline, the ghost of another door that does not actually open. No knob, no hinges, only a shallow impression in the paint. When they place a hand flat against that wall, they feel the slightest rush of air, as though something on the other side is breathing back at them through the plaster. There is a line in the younger man's notebook where he records tapping that wall with his knuckles and hearing a second, softer tap answer from inside. He tries to scratch that line out later. The page tears. Under angled light and magnification, the words remain legible enough. He never mentions telling the others. They go back downstairs. If the house notices, it does not show them in any obvious way. The first floor appears to have settled on this configuration for the day. They decide they have seen enough for now and close up their notes. Outside, the field is as quiet as before. If there are birds, the tape does not hear them. You can make out only the crunch of their boots returning across the dirt toward the truck. Hale's last entry for day 2 recommends that they return once more on the 3rd morning to complete their interior documentation. 3 days in a row at the same site, 3 opportunities to walk through a space that is not quite stable. The younger man's final line that night is something he writes only for himself. If they go back a 3rd time, he is certain things will be worse. He is not wrong. On the 3rd day, Hale stops pretending nothing is wrong. He does not say it outright. That is not his way. Instead, it shows in how quickly his entries become vague, and in how rarely he tries to rationalize the details that follow. Once again, the coordinates he records for the house are different. This time, the location has shifted in the other direction, forming, along with the previous 2 days' readings, a small, neat arc when plotted. The arc's center sits in a patch of field a short distance away from the structure itself, as though the house is slowly circling some invisible point. I have seen patterns like that twice before in other materials. The conclusion is never comforting. To the crew, this is still only an annoyance. Their equipment must be acting up. They approach the house as they have the previous mornings. It is only when they draw close that they begin to feel, even if they do not write it this way, that it is not only their devices that are unreliable. The house is larger. The change is not dramatic, the way a sudden second story would be. It is a matter of proportions. The depth of the structure has increased. The roofline has developed an unfamiliar bump. The rear portion now extends further than their original sketches allow. Hale writes a single word for it: extended. Then he stops trying to account for why. Torres is clearer in the margins. She notes that the back wall could not have looked like this the first day, because she remembers standing a certain distance from it and feeling the space behind her, and that memory no longer fits the new measurements. The younger man writes in his notebook that it is as if the house had been stretching during the night and had just finished when they arrived. The front door is no longer merely ajar. It stands wider like an invitation. They go in. By now, the living room has become a kind of barometer for the house's mood. On day 3, that room has lengthened, the far wall farther away from the door than it should be. The furniture is not just rearranged this time, it has changed entirely. The sofa is a different piece, bulkier, with carved wooden feet. It looks older than the house did on day one, as if something rummaging in a memory had substituted a different version. Torres notices the dust. Where something has been added recently, it is too clean. Where something has stood longer, a faint halo of absence remains in the settled film on the floor. The proportions of those halos no longer match the outlines of the present furniture. The house is not simply redecorating, it is recomposing itself. In the kitchen, the clock has changed again. The face is now set into a wooden frame with a pendulum visible behind glass. The style does not match either of the previous fixtures. The time, of course, has not moved. 2:18. By this point in their notes, all three of them are remarking on that frozen moment. One of them tries to test the hands and writes, very briefly, about feeling a faint resistance, as if something on the other side of the clock face were holding them in place. It is only a clock. There are many ways for a clock to break. Still, when I cross-reference the files and find that same time appearing in a flood warning system, failure 2 states away, in a very different decade, I understand why some of the older staff here make the sign of an obsolete superstition when they pass certain shelves. From the kitchen, they return to the stairwell. The number of steps has changed again. This time, they do not bother to agree on a count. Each of them records a different total. Each of them, in their own way, decides it is not worth arguing. The stairs are longer than they should be. That is enough. The second floor bears only a passing resemblance to the level they walked through the day before. The hallway stretches farther into shadow. The walls appear to lean in the slightest amount, the way perspective compresses in a photograph taken with the wrong lens. The doors are all there, but one has migrated farther down the hall. Another hangs slightly open without any of them remembering leaving it that way. As they begin to open those doors, the house stops pretending to be generic. Behind one door, they find a bare room. It has been stripped of furniture, of dust, of almost any evidence that air has moved inside. Yet, the younger man writes about the unmistakable sense of someone breathing in the far corner. He cannot see anyone. The instruments they carry detect nothing. In the absence of hardware to confirm, he does what people do. He begins to doubt his own senses and writes it down as uncertainty. Behind another, they find something worse. The house has been paying attention. One of the rooms upstairs now resembles, in broad strokes, the interior of a small apartment bedroom. The dimensions are off, and the details do not all match, but enough of them do to be unmistakable. A cheap dresser, a familiar style of shelving, the remnants of tape on a wall where posters once hung. Hale attempts to describe it as resembling a lived-in space. He omits the specifics. Torres does not write anything here at all. Only later, in the sheriff's missing persons file, do we learn that Jonah Kincaid lived in a one-bedroom apartment across town with that same arrangement of furniture, that same brand of dresser, that same pattern of peeling paint behind his bed. On day 3, in that house in the field, there is no mattress. There is, however, a poster on the wall of a mountain landscape that matches one found in a police photograph of his residence. He does not handle this well. His writing, which has been relatively steady throughout, fractures. The entry stutters. He notes that it almost looks like his room, but not exactly. The proportions are wrong, the light is wrong. There is no window where there should be a window. It is not a perfect copy. It is the attempt of something that has been watching, trying to arrange his life from pieces it has collected. They back out and shut the door. Another upstairs door now opens on something stranger, a room whose dimensions and fixtures copy the interior of their county survey truck's cab. What should be an empty box of a space contains a bench seat, a mock dashboard, even the anonymous curve of a steering column. The walls do not know quite how to resolve this. They meet the seat at odd angles, plaster and wood, bending in a way that spirits the eye away from the places they ought to intersect. Here, too, the house has gotten some details wrong. Surfaces are smooth where they should be scuffed. The impression of controls is there, but the labeling is absent. It is as if someone has described the truck from memory to a second party who has never seen it and asked them to build their understanding into the walls. On what would correspond to the glove compartment, the panel hangs partly open. Inside, the younger man sees a familiar notebook. It looks like his. It even bears the same brand and color of cover. But when he checks his hand, his own notebook is already there. 2 notebooks at once in 2 different places, both purporting to be the same object. He does not pick the second one up. No one does. They leave the room with that compartment still cracked, the false notebook still resting in the dark. By now, the house has shown them enough of itself that leaving should be the natural choice. Instead, they move deeper. At the far end of the corridor upstairs stands the door that first appeared on day 2. Now it opens onto something that is no longer simply a room. Their notes agree on an image I do not like to dwell on. When they open that door, they do not see a wall or a closet or another hallway. They see a field, not a painting. Not a projection. An interior space that contains, impossibly, the same field they have been walking across for 3 days, but at a different time of day. It is as if someone has cut a piece of the outside world loose and hung it in the air there, framed by the doorway. In that indoor field, the sky is at dusk. The basin's contours are similar, but not exact. The fence posts stand straighter. The grass is slightly taller. Shadows run at unfamiliar angles, and in that dusk field, 3 figures stand some distance away, their outlines familiar. The crew realizes, slowly, that the figures are themselves. The silhouettes are not detailed. Faces are featureless at that distance, but height, posture, and spacing all match. On the tape, you can hear one of them swear softly under their breath. Someone whispers that it must be a reflection, a trick, a refraction of light. Anything other than what it looks like. Then the silhouettes begin to move. They walk toward the door with the steady, measured pace of people approaching their own front steps. The field behind them does not show any of the equipment the crew knows is out there in the real basin. No truck, no tire tracks, no footprints. Just the three shapes closing the distance. When Hale tries to push the door shut, something in the frame resists. He records it as jammed, but the younger man writes that the wood felt soft under his hands, as if he were trying to push the door through flesh. He sees, or thinks he sees, that the version of himself in the dusk field has nothing where the face should be. They do what they should have done earlier. They run. The notes fragment from that point on. The handwriting in the log deteriorates. The younger man's notebook skips words, trailing off midway through sentences. The tape fills with heavy footfalls and the crunch of boots on stairs. They find the stairs longer than they remember. The turns in the hallway no longer match their internal map. When they reach the first floor, the living room has shifted again. Walls at slightly different angles, doorways not quite where they were when they first came in that morning. Houses do not rearrange themselves in real time, but the human brain, increasingly overloaded, tries to compose the simplest possible path out of a space that is no longer obeying its own rules. Somewhere in the noise on the tape, a slow, rhythmic impact begins. It might be a door slamming. It might be feet on floorboards somewhere above, answering their steps with its own. The sound grows louder, closer, then cuts off mid-beat. The log's final line, written in a hand that presses hard enough to almost pierce the page, begins as "Leave house immediately," and stops. There are no more entries after that. No one records stepping onto the porch, or crossing the field, or reaching the truck. No one logs the drive back to town. The next document in the chain is a sheriff's incident report, noting that the survey crew failed to check in, that their vehicle was found parked neatly by the roadside, and that no one was in the field when deputies went looking. The house is not on any photographs taken that afternoon. On paper, Hale, Torres, and Kincaid walk into an empty field on day 3 and never walk out. The logbook, the tape, and the notebook that should have stayed with the truck say otherwise. What they describe is not only a structure that should not exist, it is a space that learns. A place that listens to the people who enter it and steadily rebuilds itself in their image, using their rooms, their memories, their tools, even their own bodies as reference. By the time they realize that, it is already too late for them to leave cleanly. And if the later evidence is to be believed, the house is not finished yet. I have spent longer with these materials than I care to admit. Even now, the files resist a clean conclusion. The official record insists on the simplest version of events. 3 county employees walked into a field, became disoriented, and were lost, perhaps to hypothermia, perhaps to exhaustion, perhaps to the unremarkable dangers of open land after a storm. But the documents they left behind argue otherwise. The notebook recovered from the false glove compartment upstairs was found on a shelf in the county's intake warehouse weeks later, folded into a stack of unrelated papers. No one can account for how it got there. Its cover matches the younger man's notebook. Its pages contain early entries from the actual first day on the site, entries that should not exist twice. Handwriting analysis confirms the match. When the sheriff returned it to the family, they were understandably unsettled. They had already been given the original notebook by deputies 2 days earlier. No one can say which one was written first. Soil samples taken from beneath the house, samples collected hurriedly by a deputy who reportedly did not like the look of the place, were sealed in a bag and eventually shipped with the rest of the case materials. Technician Hari ran those samples through our lab equipment when the crate arrived at Vault 13. They contained pollen from plant species that the agricultural extension reports say disappeared from the region nearly 40 years ago. One species still exists, but only in the materials we store in Vault 7, collected from a reclamation project that failed decades before the survey logs were written. The coordinates are worse. When plotted over the 3 days, they form not a scatter but a track, subtle and graceful, describing a partial rotation around a point that has no physical marker in the field. In our indexing system, we have seen similar tracks associated with materials in other vaults. Vault 9, particularly, in their files on the Hadelman sink. Vault 3 in the unclassified portion of the steel refinery records. And something in Vault 22 that has been sealed since before I arrived. Technician Mora noticed the pattern long before I did. She left me a note pinned to the inside cover of the analysis folder. It's moving around something we're not seeing. Has this happened before? I wish I had a better answer for her. The sheriff's office eventually cleared the field. One deputy reported the house was gone when he went back alone for a final look. The foundation impressions were inconsistent with any structure of the size described in the logs. The ground where it had stood showed no settling, no footings, and no sign that anything heavier than the deputy himself had ever pressed into the soil. Their official conclusion was that the crew had become lost and wandered off. Their disappearance was later attributed to flooding in nearby drainage canals. Bodies were never recovered. The case file grew thin over the years, then thin enough to be boxed, then boxed long enough to find its way into the county's warehouse. And the warehouse eventually fed its backlog into the intake stream that brought all of this here. I have stood in front of the crate these materials arrived in and tried to imagine where the rest of the house might be now, and what shape it has taken in the time since. Places like this do not vanish. They relocate. They wait. One last detail remains, one I have put off mentioning until now. Among the loose pages in the logbook was a rough floor sketch labeled simply Day 3, Stairwell. It is similar to the others at first, hasty measurements, uncertain lines. But as the proportions extend downward, the staircase continues one turn farther than the house's known dimensions allow. When measured to scale, that lower landing matches within a narrow margin of error a short hallway outside one of our own sub-archival rooms in Vault 13. A hallway that, at the time the survey logs were written, had not yet been constructed. I compared the drawing with current schematics. The resemblance is not exact. These things rarely are. But the gesture of the space, the angle of the wall, the way the landing opens into a right-hand corridor, mirrors a portion of this facility that did not exist the year those three people walked into that structure. I showed it quietly to Technician Mora. She did not say much, only asked whether we have ever documented a case where something outside reflects the interior of this place. I did not answer her. There are patterns that should not be encouraged by giving them acknowledgement. For now, these materials will remain here in the restricted stacks, alongside the other incomplete stories and half-mapped structures that behave less like buildings and more like observers waiting for someone to walk close enough to cast a reflection. We do not know what the house in the field wanted from those three surveyors, or what it learned in the short time they spent within its walls. But whatever it became afterwards, whatever it is still becoming, remains out there, somewhere, building itself one remembered shape at a time. And if it has begun to mirror parts of this place as well, I can only hope the resemblance remains distant. For the record, the field where the house once stood shows no sign of disturbance today, but sometimes, just before dawn, the soil there cools more quickly than the surrounding ground, as if shadowed by something larger than the empty air. This concludes the recovered file. May future listeners take caution in its implications. The Archivist, Vault 13.